Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I'm Christine Freeman Roth, and I'm the principal of Lady Eaton College. And I want to welcome you today to our 5th annual Marjory Seeley Women in Leadership Luncheon. This is our virtual edition, and thank you for joining us today. This is an annual event that commemorates the college's founding principal, Marjory Seeley Rogers, whose leadership and dedication in our early years laid a solid foundation for the thriving and vibrant community we have here at Lady Eaton College. This event was created to acknowledge and celebrate female leadership within our community at LEC, at Trent, and beyond. This year, we're thrilled to welcome our 3 wonderful speakers and to welcome all of you to be part of our conversation around women and health, collective growth, and healing. I'd like to introduce Alicia Yon and Mayanna Hansen to acknowledge the land we are on, to review some Zoom basics, and outline our event today.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alicia, and I thought we'd start the event with a land acknowledgement. I am going to be doing the one for Onogo-Digawong, which is the Peterborough area. So we respectfully acknowledge that we are on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississauga and Anishinaabe. We offer our gratitude to the First Peoples for their care for and teachings about our earth and our relations. May we honor those teachings. And I encourage you all to reflect on the land that you are currently residing on or where you're tuning in from. And now I'll hand it over to Mayanna to speak to what this afternoon will entail.
Thanks, Alicia. Hi, everybody. It's so good to see everyone collected together for this event. Last year, this was the last event that we got to have in person. And it's just really special seeing some familiar faces from last year and also seeing some new names in the chat. I'm just going to go over some ground rules just to make sure that everything runs smoothly throughout the event, and also some tech support for those of us who aren't as familiar with Zoom. So as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, there's a little microphone, and then there's also a little camera. If at any point you want to stop the video, if you're uncomfortable having your video shared, or perhaps you don't want to be a part of the recording that's going to go up on our YouTube channel later, you're absolutely welcome to select the little camera icon so that it has a red slash mark through it. That means your video is off. We also encourage everyone to keep their mic off throughout the event just to limit any background noises or distractions. We all have those pets or like family members walking around, and yeah, that just helps keep things quiet. We also invite you to rename yourself with your pronouns next to your name. If you'd like, you can do this by doing a right click on the screen to rename yourself, or if you have a laptop, you can just double tap. And we will have time at the end of the panelists speaking in the first bit of the event to have a question and answer period. So we just ask that you keep questions until then. Okay, so I'm just going to go over the outline of the event. So we're going to start off hearing from each of our panelists. Elma will go first, followed by Ethel, and then Lisa will speak. That will bring us to 1 p.m. where we'll have the time for the question and answer. And then at 1:15, we're going to take a short break. We invite you to eat those yummy lunches that were delivered to you if you're in the Peterborough area, or take a break to grab some snacks. And then we're going to reconvene at 1:25 to have our breakout sessions.
I thought I would also describe our topic or our theme for this year before we introduce our lovely panelists. So this year, the theme is Women in Health, Collective Growth and Healing, and it's reflective of the unprecedented times that we are currently enduring together as a collective. And with this theme, we hope to acknowledge the strength and resilience of women who have been at the front lines and being our healers and warriors when it comes to caring for our communities, in addition to bringing to light the importance of collective responsibility when it comes to maintaining and amplifying the health and well-being of our people. Mayanna will now start by introducing one of our panelists for today.
Born in Mexico City, Dr. Alma Barranco Mendoza joined Lady Eaton College as part of the Trent International Program in 1990 to pursue a Bachelor of Science honors in Computer Science and Mathematics, which she obtained in 1994. She continued her studies at Trent, obtaining a master's in applications of modeling in the natural and social sciences. Afterwards, she obtained a PhD in computing science focused on artificial intelligence and health informatics from Simon Fraser University. She is the former Chief of Information Officer of the Canada Space Society and co-founder and CEO of Infogenetica Solutions. She has made sustained and significant contributions to tech development, implementation, and research. Alicia is going to introduce our next panelist.
Ethel Nellule is a 23-year-old Ugandan-born artist and storyteller. She's also a dear friend of mine. She's studying a joint major in forensic science and psychology here at Trent. She's the former Minister of Issues for LEC Cabinet, the former VP of Student Health and Wellness for the TCSA, and is currently one of the 2 facilitators for Trent's new Black Student Peer Support Group and the chair for the Trent Center for Women and Trans People. Ethel is passionate about global health equity, global decolonization, and African sovereignty. In the past, she has spoken at Parliament Hill, fighting for medical guideline changes for tick-borne illnesses, and has helped run multiple workshops for high school, university students in various communities, ranging from healthcare, anti-oppression, mental health, disability, the prison industrial complex, African solidarity building, methods of decolonizing, and climate justice.
Our final panelist, sorry, Alicia.
Yeah, go ahead, Mariana.
Our final panelist is going to be Lisa. So Lisa Clark is a first-generation settler from Germany, a mother and anti-gender-based violence educator. She has worked in anti-violence work, nonprofit research, communications education, feminist activism, and community development for over 20 years. Her interests include violence against women, developmental disabilities, public education, decolonization, 2S LGBTQ+, and youth engagement and empowerment. Lisa is a graduate of the Masters of Adult Education and Community Development program at St. Francis Xavier University, researching public and feminist pedagogies, social justice education, and transformative learning. Her original research explored the learning experiences of feminist public educators when facilitating conversations about consent and gender-based violence, which is of course really relevant to our discussion today.
And now we invite our panelists to respond to our guiding question for this afternoon. Panelists, can you share an experience or two where a campaign, program, activity, or event you were a part of was particularly effective in sparking engagement from the community in response to a health challenge, and what helped make it so effective? So we'll start with Alma.
Thank you so much. And I'm such an honor to come back to my, my alma mater virtually, to be able to share a little bit about my history. And really, healthcare is, my involvement in healthcare has been a long process for me. Really, I got involved very early on in my career, and it really has become a little bit of my life story. So I'm going to share a little bit about our trajectory, how we ended up from interest in health to becoming our lifestyle, essentially, in our family. And really, it all began in at Trent University, because that's where, as I was introduced, I came from Mexico, and I started learning about mathematics and computing science. And I have always been very interested in the use of these tools to address different problems in life. So it was not just math for the pure math, computers for the, just the technology, but really I see them more as a problem-solving tools. I like to say that I'm an artist who likes to solve puzzles. So, and these are my tools. So at Trent, I met my husband, Derek Prasad, and he is a biochemist. And together we started doing research ever since then. For my master's, that's when I entered my multidisciplinary program, the application of modeling in the natural and social sciences. And I started looking at biological problems since then, which led me to go to Simon Fraser University, where I did my PhD. And there I had the opportunity to interact with people from BC Cancer who had a problem of how to solve. Well, they were working on trying to develop a model for diagnosis of lung cancer, which very much aligned with the type of research that I was interested in. So I spent several years working with them, developing a lung cancer diagnostic system. And later on, when I started working at Trinity Western University, I was a professor in computing science and biotechnology. And my primary area of research was precisely risk assessment and diagnostic systems with focus on cancer and diabetes. In that university, I was a co-founder of the Institute of Chronic Conditions and Aging and the Institute of Gender Studies, where again was that mixture of multidisciplinary studies in the arts, in the sciences, in medicine. And everything was pretty exciting, but then like Derek and I were blessed with a pair of twins, and that's when really the adventure began. Because as we know, you can never know what life brings you. And my boys were developing very differently. One of them was like the typical beating the milestones right on the time, while the other one started showing a set of symptoms that were just really overwhelming. You know, he made no eye contact, terrible tantrums, a lot of food sensitivities, gastrointestinal disorders. He had an inability to feel pain. His fine and gross motor skills were very challenged. You know, like anxiety, language disorders, a whole host of things. And we were like, what is going on? And we spent nearly 2 years, well, actually almost 4 years, going with doctors, specialists, and so on, trying to figure out what is happening. Eventually, we came to identify that a lot of these symptoms fell into the autism spectrum disorder area. And the prognosis given was really bleak because he was very severely affected when he got the diagnosis. The specialist told us that he would never be able to develop normally, and he would never speak, he would never be able to care for himself, just really bleak diagnosis. In addition to this, he had 2 symptoms, the inability to feel pain and the whole fine and gross motor skills problem, where he was even, like he was 4 years old and couldn't even hold a spoon to feed himself. Turned out that he had craniosynostosis, which is the premature closure of the skull bones. So he required a reconstructive surgery of his skull. And it was, you know, it was a very severe surgery and required over a year of recovery. For a child who is hyperactive and unable to follow instruction, meant that one of us, Derek or I, had to leave the work and stay with him. And so Derek, who at the time was working at a pharmaceutical company developing Alzheimer's medication, he decided that he would be the one looking at a mirror, because very little at that time was being done with regards to science and like on the health side for autism. It was more focused on the educational aspects and behavioral aspects, but it was kind of like a life sentence. This is it, there's no improvement. And when you start looking at the impact of autism in society, it's pretty bleak because it affects 1 in every 54 school-age children. So it's an epidemic, and not only affects the child, affects the entire family, the entire society, siblings, parents, and so on. And really, we were a little overwhelmed, but we also realized that we didn't want to become a statistic. So because you can always find value in every situation that you find in life. And for us, we thought, we are scientists, we can do something about it. So we decided that we didn't want to become another statistic, and we started thinking, okay, well, what can we do? And we started looking at everything that could be done. So we look at early intervention, special education programs, any occupational therapy, speech therapy, you know, behavioral therapy, started looking at adaptive technologies, at diet, and we thought, okay, we're researchers, what can we research? And when Derek started looking at the symptoms, you know, he's spending his time with Amir at home, really started noticing similarities in terms of the symptoms that his Alzheimer's patients had compared to some of the symptoms of severe autism, which, inability to sleep, problems focusing, anxiety, unexplained fears, disorientation, energy peaks and valleys. And what he had been researching for, almost 20 years prior to this, he had been working on fatty acids and the impact of them in the body. And really, these are the good fats in our body. So you probably heard of omega-3, 6, 9, but there are about 20 different fatty acids that our body needs. And some of these have to be ingested because our body doesn't produce it. And they have very important roles in our body because they help protect the cell, they help detoxify and remove the waste in the cell. They help you to absorb nutrients, develop the cell membrane, and helps transmit information from cell to cell. And this is super important, particularly for your brain, because 60% of our brain is made up of fatty acids. And this transmission of information without fatty acids is not done effectively. And it affects all kinds of things in our body. For example, sleep, because neurons are capable to regenerate, but only when you are sleeping. And if you are unable to sleep, your neurons are not behaving the best way. They cannot regenerate. And the situation is that connectivity it is requiring the fatty acids, as well as the production of melatonin requires, that metabolic process requires fatty acids, which, again, helps you with meltdown focus and, school performance and memory. Also for healthy aging, you require all those joints and muscles and skin, they all require fatty acids. So as we age, we're losing it and we're not replenishing, is affecting us as well. Similarly with the balance of energy, because the blood glucose level management requires fatty acids in this process. So Amir would get really hyper and then he would just collapse because his energy were just kind of rush peaks and then valleys in how he was working. And, he also had severe eczema. And again, fatty acids play a role into this type of symptoms. And again, as we age, that's why we get wrinkles and, the bad scarring and so on. So another issue, like, in terms of anxiety, when fatty acids allow our energy curve to be wider, when you have only sugar as your source of energy, you get like big high peaks and then very sudden valleys. But when you eat fatty acid, this curve amplifies. So you keep a more constant balance of energy through your body, and it helps reduce stress due to hunger or chronic fatigue and so on. So it helps you be calmer. And, also with healthy weight, which is ironic because a lot of people stop eating fat because they think, oh, I'm getting overweight. But when that's a signal that your stomach sends to your brain saying, I'm satisfied, requires a fatty acid to reach the brain. So if you're not taking fatty acid, you are never telling your brain that you are satiated. So you're hungry all the time. So you end up eating more. And as well for your cardiovascular system, because the cholesterol in your brain and so on is managed through fatty acids. So it essentially makes the blood a little thinner, which flows better in your body. It makes your heart work less hard because it can flow easily. So all of these aspects get impacted by fatty acids in your body. And they were symptoms that Amir was experimenting. So they kind of started looking at all the metabolic processes involved in each one of these symptoms. And we identified that the pathways involved in that really all involve fatty acids. And they had done research about the optimal balance of fatty acids absorbed in the body. So we figured that we wanted to supplement him with a broad spectrum fatty acid supplement. We couldn't find any in the market. So we started developing our own. And we, as scientists, we were part of all kinds of research studies on autism. So our son was being followed very much by the people in the research field. And they started noticing how he went just completely out of the normal curve of development of all these other children in his cohort. And they started asking us what we were doing, and when we shared, they say, well, where can we get it? You know, you guys need to commercialize this. And that is how we ended up getting, you know, we got it patented, we sent it to Health Canada for approval, which got approved. And that's how Infogenetica Solutions ended up happening. So really, it became more of a labor of love for us because it's very personal, and it has been super exciting to see how many people over the years have benefited with this. So something that was a really tragic story for us, it became a really exciting way for us to help others. In addition, on my side, on the side of AI, I also started looking at learning systems for special education. So this is a work in progress, but working on a system for guided learning for people who have learning disabilities that are really good in certain areas and very poor in others. For humans, it's difficult to keep track about these specific types of learning. However, machines are very good to do that. And using AI, you learn how your student learns, and we can help them be able to really have more effort in the areas that are weaker and really help them develop those areas that they're strong on. You know, so wonderful technology, as I said, is that they're tools to solve a puzzle, and it has been very exciting. So just to conclude, in terms of our story, it has been a very encouraging thing, and really is a way to find fulfillment, because our boy who wouldn't sleep through the night for almost 9 years, and it's exhausting for all of us, he started sleeping better, he started to develop better interpersonal relationships. He started overcoming, he used to be terrified of animals in general, all animals, so he was now able to interact. The boy who would never speak, here, you know, giving a speech when one of his teachers' wedding. The boy who could barely walk and not be able to hold a spoon at 4 years old. Here he is climbing, and he does ceramics. That's one of his work. And just like here, they graduated from high school. So the child that would never be able to have any meaningful work or relationships, here he is graduating. So really, as I mentioned, this is a function of love, and it's a family adventure for us. So healthcare, it's very personal for me, and with our family as well. So as I said, you can find a lot of fulfillment even in the most tragic of situations. You can find a way to utilize it to become a blessing to others. So thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Alma. That was amazing. Wow. I've got some tears in my eyes. Wow. Next up, we're going to hear from Ethel.
Hi everyone, my name is Ethel Nellule. I'm a student at Trent, part of Lady Eaton. I guess that was all in my introduction. And I'm so happy to be here. Just thinking about being here in general, knowing Christine, who was my academic advisor back when she was an academic advisor, I think it's really special to see how she has seen my growth from how I came into Trent in first year and now in my final year. It's beyond. And so talking about Lyme disease, which is what I'm going to focus on today, is a huge part of all of that. So I feel like this is just going to be really special, especially for me as well. So thank you again, Lady Eaton, for inviting me back. And I'm really excited. So for me, an experience / campaign, more so experience that that is health related, is my experience with Lyme disease and Lyme disease advocacy. So going into my story in the beginning, before I started being an advocate for Lyme disease, I was actually doing the work and advocating for someone else that I knew who was a student at my high school. So it is an interesting story, for sure. So what had happened was I had been undergoing months, or even I think about 2 years of symptoms ranging from central nervous system related symptoms, joint pain, muscle pain. I was just getting a wild range of symptoms that doctors could not understand or diagnose. They thought it was MS, they thought it was sickle cell, they thought it was arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis. I had symptoms for almost every single illness you could think of that is centered around the central nervous systems and affects joints and organs. And I wasn't getting any answers. So I was around in this was around grade 11 or so. And then one day I was just walking to my locker, about to leave school, and I saw someone who I'd previously seen doing backflips and stuff on the gymnastics team, and she was in a wheelchair. So this is like a specific center for everything that stemmed from that experience. I saw her in a wheelchair. We're really close friends now. And oftentimes you don't go up to people to ask them why they're in a wheelchair, because that is ableist. But because I had seen her doing backflips the day before, I figured maybe she had injured herself. So I went up to her. We hadn't become friends then. I had just known her as a gymnast from the school. I asked her what had happened, and she said, "Oh, I have Lyme disease. Some days I can walk, other days I can't." And I'd never heard about it. I didn't know what Lyme disease was. I didn't know what tics were. So all I said was, "Oh, I hope you get better soon." But I could not get that to leave my head, because I couldn't understand how some days someone can walk and someone couldn't. And also, I found out a few days later that she was fundraising for treatment that was costing over $500,000 that was not covered by insurance, and she was traveling outside of Canada. And I still couldn't let it go. And I was like, this is another student at her school. The school is not doing anything to help her. They're focusing on other things. So I'm going to do something, because I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what Lyme disease is, but it seems unfair. So I'm just going to try. I'm 15, 16, who knows? And I'm also undergoing symptoms myself, not realizing that they connected. And so I spent all of grade 12 just organizing a walk. It was called Lyme Walk Niagara, and it happened twice. And all of grade 12, my health is like deteriorating, but I'm fundraising and like raising awareness for Lyme disease. I'm handing out ribbons in the hallways, asking my principal if we can have like out of uniform days where everyone wears green instead of the uniforms. That was my whole grade 12 year. And leading up to the day of the walk, my health had completely deteriorated by then. My grades went from, I had maybe 80s, 90s at the beginning of the grade 12th year. By the end of grade 12, I had 30s and 20s. I don't know how I'm in university right now, but I'm graduating, guys. But my grades are also really high now too. So I was just deteriorating. And so the day of the walk, it was a success. A lot of people showed up. We did a lot of good media outletting, like sharing what was going to happen at the school. And Kamea, who's my friend, her mom came up to me to ask me how I was doing. And she was like, "Have you found out what is wrong with you? Like, have they tested you for Lyme disease?" And that's when I was like, oh my gosh, I've spent a year telling everyone about Lyme disease, all the symptoms, raising awareness, raising fundraising and stuff. And I had no idea that, well, I knew, but I never correlated the two with myself. And so I was like, wow, no, they haven't like checked me for Lyme disease. But it was kind of amazing how it happened that way, though, because throughout that whole year of me learning about Lyme disease, educating others, I also learned about the injustices surrounding it, why people have to leave to go to the States for treatment, why there's doctors who lose their medical licenses if they treat you for a certain amount of time. I educated myself on all of that while educating others. So when Kamea's mom asked me if they had checked me for Lyme disease, I knew what I was up against, and I was in a way prepared and ready to start self-advocating for myself. And so I had asked my pediatrician to test me for Lyme disease. He said, "No, you've never came in here with any bite mark, like bullseye rash." But that's also noting that with darker skin, a bullseye rash does not look red. And sometimes it's not like the circle. I wish I had visuals, but I don't. So I did have a rash. And it was not found until self-advocating for myself. I fundraised for myself to go to New York to see a different specialist who tested me, and she collected all of my medical records. And there was a time I went in with a rash, but it was dismissed by like, they just called it a rash and prescribed me a lotion to get rid of the rash. And they never correlated that with everything I complained about after. So that started my process of traveling for treatments, fundraising for myself, self-advocating, and my advocacy just grew from there, because at first I was doing it for someone and then I was going through it at the same time. I learned more and more injustices, and I kept telling myself, this is unfair. Like, there's so many other chronic illnesses as well that have similar timelines. And so I started speaking more about it. Then I started getting invited to speak at places like high schools and Parliament Hill and town halls, and it was great. But back then I thought that governments cared. So I would get excited. I became friends with like doctors and scientists that did research. There's so much. I really encourage anyone that's interested to look more into the things about Lyme or late stage Lyme disease, which is what I had, that go uncovered. For example, right now things have changed. So there's been a lot of progress from all the advocacy work that a lot of people have done. But before, it was a lot more prominent for doctors to lose their medical licenses if they treated you past 3 weeks, because they said that the bacteria cannot last that long in the body. But there's so much research and proof that shows it can hide within like biofilm, which is like a protective shield that can protect bacteria from being killed by your body. Um, so what I was advocating for was for the medical guidelines to change so people could be treated past those 3 weeks. A lot of doctors did it undercover, put their licenses on the line just to treat patients. Even the doctor I saw in America, she was Canadian herself, but she moved her practice over to New York just so she can treat Canadians in New York, because doing it here she would lose her license. And so I started speaking about that. I met all these scientists, told me more and more things that were unbelievable. You'd think they were conspiracies. And I would just speak about them because I'm like, this is crazy. Like, Justin Trudeau needs to know this, because once he knows, he'll do something, you know? So I would pile research, write letters and documents. It took over a lot. I don't know how I did it because I was also really sick, but I did. And I would show up to town halls, I would show up to meetings, I would show up at Parliament Hill. I was invited to all these things. I would present my story, my friends' stories, but every single time, nothing would come out of it. Politicians would come up to me and they would say, because I would call them out in my speeches, I would say, you're not listening. And so after my speech, they'd say, we're here, we're listening. And so they'd give me their cards, I'd email them, they wouldn't respond. And that's when I realized they already know all this. I'm not sharing anything new to them. It's just not something that they can't, it's, how do I say this in a way that is makes sense? But nothing I was telling them was new. They know people are sick. They know the guidelines are not in the favor of patients, and they just continue to do what will bring in more money for the government, in a sense. And so around that time, so I did that work for maybe 2 years. My health started to get worse because that was stressful. I was then this poster child for Lyme disease, but also I was in it not knowing as much about politics as I do now. So I'd go in excited, I'd go in ready for like change to happen, and nothing would ever come out. And so that just pushed me back down. My health deteriorated, my brain got worse. I had a lot of neurological symptoms. And I started questioning why we have governments in the first place, because healthcare is so important and people deserve to be well, but it seemed like they only show up to listen and then they go back to their daily work. So I stopped doing anything for Lyme for maybe a year. And then my health got really bad anyway, so I would not have been able to continue. But after that year of reflecting, expressing my anger and getting it all out and just learning more about politics and stuff, because I was younger and I didn't know much about politics then. I just thought you can speak about things and change happens. I was invited to speak at this event that happened for a couple of years. It's called Vocal. Voices of Canadians About Lyme Disease. And then that kind of brought me back up. So right now I don't do too much publicity or anything public related when I'm talking about Lyme disease. I kind of do it in my own time, whether that's through talking with friends or, for example, just seeing the dentist the other week. Her daughter had been going through symptoms of Lyme, but she was having a hard time finding someone that would test her daughter. So I still have all these resources. People still message me they'll find me on Facebook or Twitter, and I still have names of doctors who will treat patients treat patients how they should be treated, if that makes sense. So I do that just not in the public eye, because that was very overwhelming. And I realized I get stressed easily. But that event, the Lyme Walk Niagara event, really started my health advocacy passion, because it also led to the mobility access program at Trent, because in my first, I would say 4 years of university, I started off at Laurentian and then transferred to Trent. I was really sick for the first 4 years. And in my first year at Trent, I had a lot of mobility issues. I had a lot of joint pain. I went back and forth with using a cane and a wheelchair. And sometimes I would use neither on purpose, because with a wheelchair, you have to use your arms. That would hurt my arms because I had joint pain in all of my joints. And using a cane, it would hurt my wrists and fingers because I also had joint pain in all my wrists and fingers. So I would force myself to walk. And when I ran for the vice president role with the TCSA, I realized maybe there's something I can do. It was stressful trying to come up with something I could do, but I was able to reflect on going to the mall, for example. Whenever I go to the mall with friends, we take out a wheelchair and they'd wheel me around so that I wouldn't be in so much pain. So I thought, why not start this at Trent as well? So I spoke to everyone on the TCSA and we were able to get wheelchairs donated. And now they have, it's called mobility access. I'm not too sure how it's functioning nowadays, but there's essentially mobility aids from wheelchairs, walkers, and canes on campus that visitors and students can take out free of charge to use around campus. So my experience with the inaccessibility of certain areas of campus and just my experience with the health system and just everything in general led to that coming out of it. And there's still a lot more that's always piling through my head. I feel like I'm the kind of person who, when I go through something, I don't want anyone else after me to go through it. So I'm like, okay, this was really inaccessible and awful. Let me get a wheelchair for the next person. Or my experience finding a doctor was hard. Let me compile this list to give to anyone that asks me if for doctor information or resources for Lyme disease. And so, yeah, a lot has come out from it all. I'm happy to share that my health is better. I got better last summer. Before I was super active. I was a runner, and now I'm a runner again. Never thought I would run again. I can ride a bike. It's amazing. I still have some neurological issues here and there, but I'm doing the best I've ever done I don't even know how long. I just feel great. And I think what made all of this effective was just like consistency and everyone that was involved and determined, because when I got really mad at governments in general, I just wanted to never do anything, no advocacy work ever again. But being invited again, even being invited here, is another thing that's pushing me to be like, these stories and this work, along with the work of so many other people, are so important. And so like being invited just kept reminding me that sharing these stories does matter, and there's so many people doing this work, and you can't just be silent, you can't just be quiet, if that makes sense. Because when you're up against governments, it's easy to shut down because you realize, or you see how small you are compared to the system in general. And so right now where I'm at in my life is starting to see myself as not so small. And that's all through, for example, accepting invitations like this and speaking. I have not spoken about Lyme disease in, I would say, a year or two to a group of people that isn't just one or two people. So this is really special to me. And just the consistency too, like the Lime Walk ended up being, someone else took it on because I ended up moving from Niagara Falls, took it on, and then kept it going for a bit. And then Voices of Canadians About Lyme Disease went on till I think about last year, and they may bring it back again. There were also these two moms, we called them the Lyme moms, who were part of everything, who are still actively traveling like across countries, sharing their research. They're both nurses and researchers, sharing that the Lyme bacteria itself is, it can be congenital and passed down to parents, and a lot of parents end up having children with symptoms that doctors just completely dismiss. So it's not an 100% transfer of bacteria, but it is possible. So they're continuing that work for moms so that they don't have to keep going through what they went through. So this whole group of Lyme advocacy are just people not wanting other people to go through the same thing, because it is a really hard thing to be stuck in. So there's a lot of, even now checking the CDC website, for example, there's changes. It may not have been us, but a lot of Lyme voices everywhere, other chronic illnesses. CDC's website now has a different definition of Lyme and how it should be treated than it did before. Now they're saying doctors can treat after those 3 weeks of symptoms persist. Before they were saying they'll, if you treat your patients after this time, it crosses the medical guidelines and you lose your license. And a lot of doctors have lost their licenses. So a lot of progress is coming out of it. And I think I can see the change starting to happen now. Like I was 16 then, I'm 23 now. So it really does take time, and there's small changes for sure. So yeah, that's my story. Yeah, thank you for having me. I think there was something else I wanted to end with, but I can't remember. But just if I was to leave a little message, I guess, is change is such a heavy word, because we know change does not happen overnight. Everyone knows that. But when you're in advocacy work, you when you start to see like the smallest things, you start to think it can happen. And then all advocacy work is always political. So once you start to see how up against politics you are, and how much power they have, and how little you seem to have, you actually have a lot, it can really push you down, and it can really like make you quiet, which is what they want. They want us to be quiet. They don't want us to speak up. And it is possible to just become truly like traumatized by the whole activist advocacy experience, if that makes sense. But take your time, reflect, take a year off if you have to, but never feel like the work you're doing is not doing anything. Because I've had people reach out to me. It's overwhelming to hear these stories, but they're, I think, important to share, that people have told me that I have helped them get answers. I have helped, they went back to school because of me. And I'm out here like, what do you mean? I'm struggling with school. How am I helping you go to school? But people telling me I helped them get answers. I helped their parents get answers. They finished school. And even people older than me, like I'm talking elders, my friends' grandparents telling me these things. So it's really special and means a lot. And I'm now at a place to continue doing what I can, resting, trying to work through my stress, but keeping going regardless. And I'm graduating, so that's cool. Thank you.
Ethel, thank you so much for sharing. And I want to say that I met Ethel at a time where she was unwell, but her passion and her dedication to this work and for wanting better for others has always been so clear to me. Like the moment I met you, Ethel, I just knew you were someone special. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you for sharing. And now I'll pass it along to Lisa.
Thank you so much. The first thing I want to say is thank you to Alma and Ethel, because my 17-year-old has autism spectrum disorder and has 1 credit to go and will be graduating from high school and got into college. And Alma, I know how that feels. That's just amazing, you know. And for you, Ethel, I mean, Ethel, we've met before. And one of my closest friend's daughters is one of those Lyme moms. And My friend is the Lyme mom, and my mom actually got bit by 5 ticks 2 summers ago, but because of the color of her skin as a white woman, was able to get treatment within those 3 weeks. And so it's a powerful journey and an extremely important conversation, considering that Lyme disease has been found in ticks in the middle of Toronto. How this advocacy needs to continue, and thank you for bearing that torch for so long. I think that my conversation will balance and sum up your both conversations about the moment I learned that I needed to start taking care of myself in a different way as a woman and as an activist. And so for some of you here today, you will remember in 2013, Sheila Rogers came to Market Hall in Peterborough, hosted by Parn, to give a conversation. And I had the opportunity to be on the planning committee of that really incredibly moving day. And that day changed my life in many, many ways. First of all, it provided me an opportunity to work at Parn in harm reduction work. I had left the field of developmental services, and that in itself, for anybody who ever has the opportunity to volunteer or work for Parn, is life-changing. Secondly, Missy Knott finished off that event with the Strong Woman song. And as a member of Curve Lake and just an incredible performer, that really started a cascade of work that I do as a settler with a German Jewish background. And Germans have a particular relationship with the First Peoples of North America, and my family is no different. And so that appreciation and that lifting up of the indigenous nations of Turtle Island has been very important to me, and it started at that moment. And as well, I had the opportunity to work with Kim Dolan, who was the executive director at Parn at the time, and is now the executive director at the YWCA Peterborough. And what we all didn't know at the time was I needed Kim and I needed this event more than ever, because I was in a mental health crisis, because at about 36 years old, I had started after some significant surgery due to a disability called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, type 3. I had almost died. And because of that life-changing event, I started to come out of the closet. I was married to a man. I had 2 children, 2 young children at the time, and my life was absolutely falling apart. As you described, Ethel, living with chronic pain and the effects of a different way of knowing the world and interacting in the world affects both your body and your mental well-being. I didn't see at the time that what was going on in my mind was so connected to the rest of my body. But I had the opportunity at the event to hear women talking about mental well-being and vulnerability and sharing stories. We heard stories of complex trauma, and all of this as a person coming out of the closet as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse and sexual assault and intimate partner violence. It all started to come together for me. And that led to an opportunity to start working at Kawartha Sexual Assault Center. That, as a survivor, having the privilege to work at a sexual assault center is, again, a really life-changing experience. I met so many survivors like me. I met so many people who were exploring sexuality, gender expression, and identity in accountable spaces where we were learning together who we were and how to separate that from the trauma that we had experienced. I also had found Brene Brown, and as a white-skinned woman, Brene Brown really resonates, you know, but I knew that there were some things missing. When I had looked at the crowd at the Sheila Rogers event, it was a very white predominant space. Brene Brown being one of the biggest voices now in vulnerability and shame, again, a very strong white voice. And I knew that things weren't quite where they needed to be. And as somebody who had tried so hard to be in the closet and be married to a man and live a cis hetero normative nuclear family life, things continued to fall apart, and I was looking for answers. And one of those answers, and what I'll talk about in the following presentation, is around intersectionality and what I've learned about intersectionality as a white woman. And my journey at the Sexual Assault Center became a journey where I got to be the executive director. And that was so powerful as a survivor to become a leader in talking about the impacts of trauma on our lives and our resilience. And I had the opportunity at that point to actually be at Lady Eaton College as part of the group working with Camp Firefly. And so being an adult in a space where I didn't have the opportunity when I tried to come out of the closet at 18 years old, I then had the space to make an accountable and a loving and a welcoming space for youth. And that was transformative, especially when my youngest child was there with me. I also had the opportunity to work with one of the Trent researchers, Dr. Katerina Kiefer, who's doing primary research on resilience and exploring the ways in which we can develop programming and understand ourselves better and have tools to be more resilient. And as Dr. Ann Matson says, and Dr. Kiefer often repeats, this is just ordinary magic. There's nothing that we're born with that makes us resilient. It's around us and our communities. And so I have wanted to grow that community, and yet things continue to be wrong with the community. It's a community that, as a first generation person, I was able to get a master's degree here in this country, and yet other single mothers, two-spirit folk, for instance, wouldn't be able to access what I have been able to access. And then something happened. Then COVID-19 happened. And on top of that, I had a trigger that I couldn't overcome. And I had a serious episode of PTSD. And of all those conversations and about vulnerability and accepting ourselves and being ourselves in the world, suddenly again felt like it was all going to collapse as a woman in a leadership position, a woman leading a sexual assault center. I couldn't be the person who is experiencing trauma and the triggers and flashbacks, that we were supporting others, because I was in a leadership position. And that moment told me that there was something even more wrong about the structure and the system itself. And so what I have learned, and what I hear in the ways that Alma and Ethel have advocated and been activists, is how, as women, we put our whole body into not only learning about ourselves and holding our family, but in changing systems. And sometimes we need to leave the system in order to change it. And so in new ways, I have been able to find already, in just the 3 months since I left the center, ways to address the system in new ways, the way to speak about trauma and resilience to medical professionals in new ways outside of the symptom as a consultant, rather inside the system as an executive director, in which I was paid, you know, by the Ontario government as Ethel was describing, the ways when you're receiving monies from the government, you can't advocate on an issue the same way you can from the outside. And I want to really acknowledge the ways, you know, where we're learning to be ourselves and vulnerable and talk and break the silence from the Me Too movement. And yet that leaves us in a space where the system itself is still oppressive, that we are supposed to fit into a box as women, as leaders. And we can't be ourselves fully in those positions because it's still a patriarchal, hierarchical, and white supremacist system. And so my journey will continue, and my journey will recognize the fact that my mind and my body have never been detached from each other, that the effects of doing this work as a person living with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome meant that the ways in which I process stress, as Ethel described with Lyme disease, and the way that Alma described with autism spectrum disorder, which is so underdiagnosed in girls and women. There is just much work to do. And as we look at the hashtags of International Women's Day with feminist recovery, and then, as I might critique in my later presentation, choose to challenge, there is still much work to be done. There's much work to be done in new ways because of COVID-19. And we need to rethink about the ways in which feminist leadership itself is truly feminist and not just part of the patriarchal system. And so thank you, everybody, for having me here today and sharing my story, and the two panelists. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you so much, Lisa. I first learned a little bit about you from the Women's Portrait Project. And I'm so glad that I got to hear more about your story. And please know that you've made so many people feel seen by telling your story today and emphasizing the importance of needing to take breaks and make sure that you're taking care of yourself, as well as the compassion and kindness that you give to others. Thank you. So at this time, I'd like to invite anyone who has any questions to raise your virtual hand. At the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, there's a little smiley face symbol that says reactions. And if you click on that, there's a little icon that says raise hand. If you do that, I'll be able to see who has questions, and then I'll just call out your name, and then I'll get you to unmute. And if you could just indicate which speaker you'd like to ask the question to, and then you can just go ahead. So yeah, I'll give everyone a minute to raise their hands. Maybe actually I'll start off with a question. Ethel, while you were talking, you talked about how you recognized that you needed to take that year off and have some time to yourself. And I was wondering if you could talk about some of the signs that you were recognizing in yourself that were indicating that you needed to take that time. Yeah, and basically what indicated to you that you needed to take a break.
Yeah, for sure. With any advocacy work, I feel everyone gets burnt out. And so I was burnt out because when I started doing the Lyme disease advocacy work, I didn't know what to expect. I thought I found these conspiracy-like answers, and the second the government finds out they exist, they're gonna want to not have them and stuff and do something about it. So I realized I started getting like really anxious, like depression got worse. I was ranting about the government 24/7 to anyone. You would say, hey, Ethel, I'd be like, the government sucks. The healthcare system sucks. But no, yeah, my depression got really worse. And it didn't help because I also had neuro symptoms. So like cognitive issues, so irritability, anger, depression, and then mix that with neuro symptoms. My brain started to deteriorate actually. Like I could not, I could look in the mirror and not know who I was. That went on for 6 months and I was in second year at that time. And I just could not anymore. Like, and then it got to the point where if I heard the word Lyme, it would just trigger almost like a panic attack because I wanted nothing to do with it. And I just felt like the government could not do anything about it, as well as being kind of this poster person. I deleted everything about myself to do with Lyme. Now, there's still things you can find, but I went into accounts, changed my name, asked news articles to change my name. I just wanted nothing to do with Lyme. And then I went on like a Facebook group that had a bunch of people, like it was maybe an Ontario Lyme disease group, and people were wondering, where did Ethel go? Has anyone heard from her? And like some of the comments were really disheartening. Some people were like, oh, we heard she got better and moved on. She doesn't care about it anymore. She just wanted attention. And that pushed me even further. I said, you do all this advocacy work, you can't even get mad. People don't see that you're also sick while doing it. And then they're saying that you were doing it for attention. And so all that just led to a huge burnout, and I just exited. I deleted all my social media and everything. But the year off definitely helped. You can really forget that there is part of life that you can enjoy. There are other things to life than just focusing on advocacy. It is part of you. You will always do it, but you can never forget who you are. And so coming out of it, I was able to finally venture back into that.
Thank you. That's awesome. We have a question from Carol.
Thank you. Ethel, I want to know if you have plans after graduation, but that's not my question. And it's also not fair. But my question is for Alma, and I'm just really grateful for all the information you shared, and would like to find out, maybe you can talk a little bit about, where people can access that, like some of that information, and yeah, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Carol. A lot of the research we have been working on primary research, and it's my husband who has been doing a lot of this research, and myself in collaboration. We have some Facebook groups. You search for Infogenetica, sometimes we post stuff there. Obviously, we are trying in our website, infogenetica.com. We are trying to generate content. We're in the process of uploading some of that information to do knowledge translation, because we find through our journey this is one of the things that has been eye-opening, frustrating as well, that there's a lot of information that average people cannot access because it's either all fully scientific, or like the doctors cannot reserve it for you for themselves in a way. Nobody is writing to the average person. So one of the objectives that we have, both my husband and I, is to be able to make science accessible. Also, in terms of natural resources, like a lot of the research that we do is on plants, plant-based and natural products. Because, for example, when Derek was working in the pharmaceutical industry, he identified that some of those medications that were being developed for Alzheimer's, which were fatty acid based, could have been done with natural products. but the pharmaceutical company wanted to patent ingredients. So they would go with synthetic components instead. So when we started working with Amir, that was one of the things that we promised ourselves, that we would only work with natural ingredients. First of all, because they're better for your health. You know, there are so many elements that are already integrated that when you develop it synthetically, you take away from nature things that makes them work better with your own systems, as well as make it significantly more expensive. So that is one of the things that for us has been very important. Also for people who are, Ethel mentioned it very well as Lisa, when you are a minority person, access to health is very difficult. I spent the first 4 years of my son's life advocating and going to doctors where they would talk very slowly, very loud. Oh, mom, children develop differently just because I was a Latina with an accent. You know, they could not see beyond that. And, you know, I reached to the point that I would first introduce myself as Dr. Barranco so that they would take me seriously. I hate having to use my title to be able to get access to information, but sometimes you have to. But at the same time, it cringed my heart to think, well, I have that opportunity, I have that privilege, but what about the people who don't? What about that new immigrant parent who barely speaks English, whose child needs access to health services and they don't? So that's another area that we are trying to advocate. So yeah, thank you for asking that question. We are really conscientious, and I think it should be all of us, but you know, for those of us who have access to the data, let's try to be more proactive in reaching out to those who don't have it, because health systems tend to be very elitist and very discriminatory to people in you know, who don't fit a special norm. So yeah, that's a big important aspect for us. So and we're hoping that some of our work can help others to be able to self-advocate as well, to be able to have the papers associated with it so that they can find the article and then find the research so they can bring to their doctor and say, like, look, I actually understand this in English, but this is something that I can justify my understanding it in English.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful.
Thank you, Alma. And thank you, Carol, for your question. Next up is Valeria. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Sorry. Thank you. So my question is for Lisa. Sorry, you were mentioning some points about feminism, and today is International Women's Day. And I don't know, everyone is like, oh, happy International Women's Day. But in my opinion, like, I don't believe it's happy, knowing that there is a lot of sexual and domestic violence happening around the world. And I feel like I've been having a lot of discussions or arguments with my friends when they're like, no, feminism is just about putting, I don't know, women over men and stuff like that. But I believe like there is more than that. And I don't know, I just wanted to hear your opinion about feminism.
I think you're exactly right. It's a very strange time for feminism, and that's why I think that Kimberly Crenshaw's work on intersectionality and growing this understanding in this new way and focusing on the difference between equality and equity is really where I'm able to land in a lot of good conversations. It's very interesting because there's lots of new conversations around things like resilience, and the fact that resilience can be a very racist term. And allyship means you're around the issue, but not actually in the issue. And so I think that there's opportunity with feminism itself to, and Angela Davis, thank you, Carol, before Crenshaw. Like, I think that there's this opportunity right now And transformational learning theory is one of those ways, also like creating cognitive dissonance in people. So if you want to go from a sociological perspective, there's this opportunity just to disrupt a thinking pattern about something with a little bit of something different. And this happens a lot with my 17-year-old. My 17-year-old has ASD and gets fixated right now around trans issues. And so it's like, well, I don't believe gender is a thing at all. I just don't believe it. So I'm not going to honor pronouns. And that for me is the worst thing ever as a mom, right? And like, what's happening here? But, you know, I continue to be engaged in creating small disruptions in where this child is finding learning. The internet has changed everything. You know, all of this Trumpism and those pieces have changed everything. And it really is a commitment. And then there is an opportunity like Ethel to let somebody else take that charge. So I see myself as a person who is creating just these little disorienting dilemmas or cognitive dissonance, and then letting the magic of that transform people's experiences. They will start searching. So that's how I'm currently doing it and saving my energy.
Thank you.
Welcome.
All right. Thank you so much to our panelists for answering some of the questions during our Q&A period. We are now going to move into our 10-minute break. But before we break, I'd like to explain what the rest of the afternoon will look like for the event. So this afternoon, we're going to have breakout room sessions, and that's an opportunity for you all to self-select a breakout room with the speaker that you'd like to hear more from. And in those breakout rooms, there'll be more in-depth discussions of what was spoken about today, which is super exciting. So Sylvia is going to make those 3 breakout rooms, and you'll be able to access them when she opens them through a breakout room icon that's going to appear at the bottom of your screen. And then you'll have the option to self-select. If you are not able to see that icon, you can type into the chat what speaker you'd like to hear more from, and then we will be able to manually put you in there. Otherwise, I'm also acknowledging that there were some questions in the chat, which were amazing. And I suggest that you could hold them off until later in the discussion for the breakout rooms. But really thank you all for participating this afternoon for the beginning portion. So we'll break now. It is 1:13 and we'll come back at 1:25. So it'll be 10-ish minute break. I want to thank you all again, and we'll see you in a little bit.